All right, young people, today's objective is to get through the New Deal. But in order to do that, we've got to wrap up the Great Depression and lead into the New Deal. And the biggest thing is to make certain that you understand how everything fits together in this particular unit from World War I through the New Deal. We start out this process talking about what was going on leading to the World War I era. We're talking about 1914 until 1919. I taught you about the acronym MAIN. Main causes of World War I: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. Again, militarism. You had countries and nations who were trying to brag that they have the top or the greatest militaries in the world. This is going to mean that now countries are going to have standing armies. It's unlike the days before the Revolutionary War, where the United States did not have a standing army. They had to rely on the service of Minutemen and the militia. But now countries have armies that are trained and that are always on guard and on standby to be used whenever necessary. It's a time that everybody is trying to go out and explore and conquer. This age of conquest means that you're going to have trained troops that are ready to go in to defend or to extend your territories. So militarism gives bragging rights to those nations who believe that they are the top dogs, but it also means that it provides an opportunity to pit nation against nation. The alliance system was a very complex network. It's a little bit more than the you scratch my back and I scratch yours idea, but it means that nations are going to enter into agreements with each other to support each other. And this also becomes important when you're talking about trying to build or grow powerful empires and powerful nations throughout the world. Imperialism is this superiority idea that because I have a better economy or perhaps better culture or better political system, that I deserve or I have the right to control you because you are a lesser nation. Nationalism hinges on the idea that one has great pride for their country, that one has the utmost respect for their national heritage. This is also going to lead, as you know, Gavrilo Princip to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, who were from Austria-Hungary. Whenever you talk about war and conflict, we know that everything is summarized by peace. In 1919, Wilson and the Big Four had meetings in Paris where they talked about the peace plan to come out of this conflict. Wilson proposes 14 points. These were not accepted by all of the European nations, but they were able to finally agree on the Treaty of Versailles. We know that the treaty predominantly dealt with territory, meaning what are we going to do with the colonies and territories that have been stripped from Germany and other people who allied with them during that time. You also know that it shrunk Germany's military, also made Germany pay off war debts called reparations to the other countries who were working together at that time. Really wanted to stunt Germany's ability to rise as a world power and prevent them from ever creating conflict in the world on the world stage again. We know that after we come through World War I and we come through peacetime, that we enter a period of prosperity, specifically focusing on the United States. Between 1920 and 1929, we've come to call this era the Roaring Twenties. We know that the 20th century weapons created and needed during World War I are also going to lead to a rise in industry. Where are these weapons going to be manufactured? In factories, which provides jobs and opportunities for people on the American front. When people are able to go back to work, they're able to gain more money. When people have more money, they're able to afford more. They start to make investments and start to put money into the stock market. So whenever you think about the stock market, I need you to think about big business. I need you to think about people being able to feed money into corporations in an effort to gain more money for themselves. People are also starting to buy things on credit as everyone is starting to enjoy relative happiness in terms of what I can get, what I can have, and what I can do. We're also going to realize how this prosperity leads to overspeculation, overproduction. Industry starts to slow down. The supply starts to outweigh demand. It's going to start to create problems. We know that we had other things such as bank failures, among other things that are going to lead to the stock market crash, which occurred on October 29th, 1929. It is also known as Black Tuesday. Several of these things, speculation, overproduction, bank failures, the stock market crash, the Dust Bowl, among other things that we will discuss, are believed to have been among the 5 causes of the Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 through 1939. We know that the U.S. is also going to change a lot of its economic policy during this time. It's going to restrict international trade. When I talked about the Dust Bowl, when you think about moving out west, when you think about drought, a series of intense heat weather days where it's very hot, very little rain, you're going to have crop failure. You're going to lose vegetation as trees and plants and other things start to die. Whenever you don't have grass and vegetation to anchor the dirt, it then makes it feasible when the wind blows or when it does rain. It allows for erosion, but it creates these dust clouds, which could also be harmful to the health of those who are breathing in these dust particles and this dirty air. So the Dust Bowl really took its toll on American people during this time, and we start to see poverty increase like never before. Also keep in mind with the stock market crash, as people are losing, they're also losing their farms, they're losing their earnings, and the things that they've become accustomed to are no longer crutches that they can rely on. So, of course, whenever the country is experiencing problems, everybody wants to look to the presidency. The president during this time was Herbert Hoover. He was one who initially chose not to respond to a lot of the things going on during the Great Depression era because he believed in this concept of rugged individualism. Rugged individualism means that an individual ought to be able to work hard enough to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and to come out of a difficult situation. That if a person is tenacious, meaning that they work hard and they are determined enough that they can overcome, still many people are going to demand, hey, president, you've got to do something. And by 1932, Hoover says, okay, I will. Maybe we should do something. So he organizes what is known as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. However, it's too little, too late. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was tasked with giving money to banks and businesses who could then provide more resources to individuals. So he says, okay, if I help the banks, if I help the businesses, then maybe that will end some of the struggles. But by then, things had already sunk to all-time lows. They're already several years into the Great Depression, and Hoover just doesn't get the response that he wants to get. Hoovervilles were little shanty towns. When I say shanty towns, I want you to envision areas with very poor and limited housing. It's established for low-income and poor people who don't have food, who don't have jobs, who have meager necessities. It's not a good place to be. And these are starting to pop up outside of the cities all around. Again, people are experiencing loss. People are losing their life savings and their earnings and living in really hard times. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, wins the next presidential election, and he promises Americans a new deal. He says, we're going to deal with unemployment. We're going to deal with poverty. We're going to give Americans another shot. And he's elected. One of the strategies that he utilizes was fireside chats. It means he wants everybody to understand what's happening, what's going on, and how change is going to take place. A lot of these fireside chats were broadcasted over the radio airwaves. We do also know that at the age of 39 or so, that FDR was struck with the disease called polio, and he ultimately lost mobility and was confined to a wheelchair. Now, I'm going to tell you this, young people. Most people might think that that's not very presidential because you got a sick president or a weak president, and that might not be good for business. But thank goodness he had a very supportive wife. Miss Eleanor Roosevelt often traveled and made lots of appearances. She spoke on behalf of her husband and the principles and philosophies that he promoted throughout the country, and she also served as his eyes and ears. Whenever she heard things, she could bring it back to him, and he could continue to work very hard to make certain that change took place. The 3 R's of the New Deal that you need to be aware of are relief, recovery, and reform. When we talk about relief, several agencies were created at this time in order to get people out of the bad place that they were in. When you talk about relief, you're talking about the fact that hungry people need to be fed. So agencies like the FERA, anybody know what that stands for? The Federal Emergency Relief Act. This funded state and local governments to provide emergency relief, and it also allowed people to be hired to do quote-unquote make work projects. So people were able to get funds from their local government in order to help them out of the tragedies that they were in. The CCC, anybody know what that stands for? The Civilian Conservation Corps. Civilian Conservation Corps. It gave jobs to young men to go out to plant trees, to clean up forests, to live in camps, and to receive free food so that all of their earnings could be sent back to their families. The PWA, what does that sound like? Public Works Administration. This created public buildings such as schools, courthouses, post offices, and it also allowed funding for bridges, roads, and other things that the public could use. And the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, created jobs for artists, writers, musicians, and others to paint murals, produce plays, and to create other artwork that other people could enjoy. So from relief, we now go to recovery. How do we recover, you say? Well, one thing FDR's program says is prime the pump, meaning pour money into business, pour money into the economy, and it will be stimulated again. If you prime the pump, it will once again provide you what you need, give strength to a dying industry. So priming the pump was one of his very first initiatives. He also created other organizations to include the NRA, which no is not the National Rifle Association, as one might think, but instead the NRA stands for the National Recovery Administration. And this is what allowed businesses to follow these voluntarily follow codes, which would set standard pricing and production limits and pay people minimum wages. So this was what the federal government tried to do, but then in 1935, it was declared unconstitutional because the federal government cannot mandate state business. That has to be done by states. So at least he tried. And then AAA, no, not the company that you call if your car breaks down on the side of the road, but the Agricultural Adjustment Acts. The AAA allowed farmers to plant less in hope of increasing crop prices. And then the government subsidizes or pays those farmers for planting less without having to lose a lot of money. The first kind of round of it occurred in 1936. In 1938, a second round occurred in which they finally succeeded in raising farm prices. And under the second act, it allowed the government to buy any of the farm surpluses and store them in warehouses so that hopefully prices would go up. And the last R, reform. The FDIC was instituted. Know what that is? The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. In other words, it issues or insures bank deposits so that people don't lose all of their money if banks should ever fail again. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was created to watch over the stock market and to prevent against fraud and hopefully another stock market collapse. And the Wagner Act, which might also be called the National Labor Relations Act, says that workers have a right to form unions, to participate in collective bargaining, and to submit grievances if they feel like they're being treated unfairly. The SSA kind of sounds like Social Security Administration, huh? Close. The Social Security Act actually institutes the Social Security Administration in 1935, and it was considered one of the most important measures of the New Deal because it allowed workers to collect unemployment insurance if they lose their jobs and to receive some type of retirement once they met an age where they were too old to work. All of these three R's contributed to bolstering the United States economy. I want you to understand that not everybody was in favor of the New Deal. And in fact, there were actually two, the New Deal and the Second New Deal. And all of these things went into trying to get the United States out of the Great Depression, which only happened after the initial prosperity of the 1929s, which happened as a direct result of World War I. So you've got to build all of the bridges and connect all of the dots so that you can fully understand how all of these things work together.